to welcome you into this message, and I'm glad that you're here because I said a prayer that the Lord will send those of you here who need to hear it. So I don't believe that you're listening to this by accident. Today I want to really talk to you about what it means to go first. It means that there are a lot of things that will transpire over the course of your lifetime that isn't things that would necessarily happen in the lives of your peers, in the lives of those around you, or just what you see on a regular basis with everyone else. It's different. Your story will be drastically different. I'm actually going to take you to scripture where we hear about how Joseph was someone in his family who had to go first. And there are many other accounts within scripture where the Lord has set someone apart where he's saying, you're going to be the one that's going to go first. You essentially become a poster child for other people to say, if they can do it, then I can do it too. If they can get through this obstacle, then I can get through this obstacle too. If they can go through this specific thing, then whatever it is that God has me to go through in my lifetime, I can make it through. But there's someone that has to go first, and a lot of times that is you. And I know that because you're listening to this message right now. There are many people who the Lord has put desires in their heart, and he's told them to do certain things, and they don't have the courage to do it yet. They don't have the strength to do it yet. They don't have the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And it's because they lack courage. And if they lack courage, they're not going to step out on faith and do certain things. But if you've been called to go first, you have a mindset to seek out wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. You have a mindset to seek out God and seek out his word and seek out the things that he has put in your heart, not just let them lay dormant. But I really want to take you, I'm going to put a pause on Genesis chapter 37, and I'm going to read to you something that I wrote down. I wrote down a list just to help you identify if you are someone that's been called to go first and what that really means, what that means that you're called to, what that means for the course of your life, what that means when it comes to what God is requiring of you. There are certain things that you begin to see that will happen in your life if the Lord has said, you are someone that I want you to go first, so that others can use you as an example or as influence or as inspiration to continue on the path that he's laid out for them. One of the first things is that you have been called, I'm just going to read out to you what you've been called to do if you've been called to go first. You've been called to break generational curses. It's really important that you understand if God has called you to do anything first. It doesn't mean that he's called you to do everything first. It could just mean one thing. It could just mean one small thing, but that one small thing is going to break a generational curse off your family. And it could just be that over the course of your lifetime, the Lord has said, you were going to do this first. So that means that you have been called to break generational curses if you've been called to go first. It means that you've been called to live a set apart life. And this part is very important. Many people, when they've been called to go first, they completely skip over and they completely ignore the fact that the Lord is requiring of them to live a set apart life. This means that you cannot live like everyone else. You cannot do what everyone else is doing. You just can't live like everyone else. And it means that you've been called to influence others because many people, really, like I said earlier, they can't believe it can be done unless they see it through you. And this is really what you've been called to. And I have another list that I want to outline to you, and it's going to really put things into perspective for you. But first, I want to take you to Genesis chapter 37, and I'm going to be reading to you verse 5 through verse 11. I'm going to be breaking it down to you, so stick with me here. It says, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And he said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? That's all they heard. He told them a mouthful, and all they heard was, you're going to be above me. And that's the thing when it comes to being set apart and when it comes to going first. People really want to support you and they really want to encourage you until they find out or they perceive that you're doing better than them, and then all of a sudden the story changes. But his brothers listened to him, and all they heard was, you were going to reign over us. And they said, this is verse 8, his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? That's all they heard. And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So one of the things that I really want you to understand This is the first thing that will begin to transpire over the course of your lifetime. And you'll start noticing this, especially if the Lord has called you to be first at something, is that people that you communicate with on a regular basis cannot comprehend your vision because it was given to you and you alone by God. There's a reason that the Lord didn't allow them to understand your vision. There's a reason that they're blinded to it. There's a reason that they're spiritually deaf to it. And it's because they have not been called to walk with you on this journey or into that season. That's number one. Number two, it's been given to you by God and you alone. The people that have been called to walk with you when it comes to aiding you or helping you in some way, shape, or form, these are the people who will understand your vision, or if they don't understand it, they have a desire to still support you. They won't feel any kind of jealousy towards it, or they won't feel any kind of animosity towards it. They want to see you do better, even if it's you doing better than them. But that's the first point, is that the people you communicate with on a regular basis, they won't even comprehend the vision that God has given you. And it's because it was given to you and you alone by God. And I'm going to keep reading starting at verse 9. It says, "Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. 'Listen,' he said, 'I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.' When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, 'What is this dream you had?'" Now, I'm going to stop there because one thing I really want you to put notice to and understand is that a lot of times when you begin to explain things about what God has called you to do, and it's a first thing. I mean, this is something that the Lord has called you to do first. And it doesn't mean that no one in the world has never done it. It means that no one that you know has ever done it. So when you have been called to do a first thing, you begin to talk to people about it, you will oftentimes be rebuked. People will oftentimes, because they don't understand it, and like I said earlier, they cannot comprehend it. What people do not understand or comprehend, a lot of times, instead of seeking out further understanding, instead of just saying, okay, maybe this is the path that the Lord has called them to walk. And so clearly there is something that they know that I don't. Clearly that God has taken them somewhere that I've never been. Instead of doing that, they will rebuke it. They will see it as evil. It reminds me of when Jesus had started his ministry. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, they thought that what he was doing was evil. They said, "I know who God is, but who are you?" They really thought that he was teaching doctrines of demons because he came on the scene with a gospel that they were not familiar with. When people don't understand things, they immediately begin to devalue it. They begin to discount it. They begin to shut it out, and they begin to rebuke it. But it's because they don't have the vision. God has given you the vision, and you alone the vision. But even his own dad said that he rebuked him when he began to show him or tell him what it was that God had shown him. And it says, starting at verse 10, when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come down and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. It will stir up jealousy. It will stir up jealousy in other people. And so this is why I say a lot of times, and I've done many messages on this, how it's really important not to share things prematurely before it's been fully made manifest. And I talk about this in Journey Through the Wilderness as well. And so God will allow you to, this is another point that I really want you to take into account, and I'm going to explain to you why. God will allow you to see people in a way that you've never seen them before. God will allow you to see people for who they really are. When we are interacting with people, a lot of times we have blinders on. A lot of times we're not seeing the real them. We don't know the real them. We think we know people, but we really don't. But when God sets you apart, when God calls you to be first in some things, he will lift the veil off your eyes to where you see people in a way and in a light that you've never seen them before. You begin to see all the different layers of people, and you begin to really see them how God sees them. And he does this not so that you can condemn them harshly or so that you can judge them, because a lot of times this is what people do when God begins to show them people in a way they never seen them before. He does this so that we can understand two things. We can understand, number one, that we've been set apart from them. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in detail and explain why. And he also does this for number 2, so that we can love them better and differently. Because if we can understand that we have been set apart from people, then we don't begin to mesh ourselves with them. We begin to see that the path that we're taking does not have to be the path that they're taking. And I want to explain that a little bit better. A lot of times when we grow up in a same environment with people, or we grow up in a certain household with people, or we grow up going to a certain school with people, or hanging out in a certain clique with people, and then we continue to keep those people in our lives, and we see that they're going down a certain path, we can easily think, not everyone, but most people can easily think that because their peers are doing something, they are supposed to do that same thing. And they begin to compare themselves to those people who came from that same environment, from that same job, from that same school, from that same household area, whatever atmosphere. And when you're set apart, that doesn't even matter. What those people are doing doesn't even matter. You can't compare, your life cannot compare to their life, because God is doing something supernatural in your life and through you, because you've been called to go first. So what that means is your life is going to look drastically different than what they're doing. The course of your life is going to go drastically different than the course of your peers' life, those who came from the same environment with you, the same household as you, the same job as you, or whatever it may be, because you've been called to go first in a very specific thing. And the Lord is very specific about calling people to go first. It's not like He'll say, okay, I want you to go first, and this, I want you to go first, and that, and a ton of other things. He's very specific with it. And it's for a very specific reason, because the Lord is a God who does things in divine order. But He does it so that, one, you can see that you're set apart. The path of your life and your life story is going to look drastically different than those around you. It doesn't mean that there isn't anyone who's had a similar story in the entire world, but it means that the people around you, it's going to look drastically different. And then 2, it's so that you know how to love them differently, because when you start to see that, wait a second, what I'm experiencing is not what they're experiencing. This is drastically different, but the Lord is taking me somewhere, and you're trusting God and you're holding on to Him. When you start to see that, you realize that your way of thinking and your way of being, the Lord is requiring you to rise above in those things. He's requiring you to rise above in your way of thinking and your way of being. And when you do that, people start treating you differently. People start, and this brings me to the next point, people start treating you differently when you begin to see them differently. And when that happens, it's really hard to keep that same love for people. It's really hard to keep that same compassion and empathy for people when they start treating you differently, because they start saying things like, you think you're better than them, or they start saying things like, you think you're better than me, or you changed, or they just simply stop doing what they were doing before altogether. Because like I said earlier, when people think that you're doing better than them, it's a different story, but they'll continue supporting you and encouraging you and being there for you, as long as you're not doing better than them. But then the moment you start to elevate and rise above and understand that you've been set apart to walk a different way in life, then people start treating you differently. So that was one point. And another point is that you have, and I really want you to pay attention to this. This is another reason, this is another way that you will know that the Lord has called you to go first. And it's one thing that you'll begin to see as a pattern in your life. And it will begin to change the way that you react, change the decisions that you make and how you move forward in your life, is that you have a level of courage. I'm talking about is supernatural courage. You have a level of courage that far exceeds your natural abilities. This means that the Lord is supernaturally helping you move forward in life. When you have a level of courage that far exceeds your natural abilities, and the Lord is supernaturally moving you forward in life, it means that you will begin to do things that you can't, you begin to stand for things, and you begin to push forward in things and make certain decisions that, in your strength alone, you wouldn't do. You wouldn't have the courage to do it, because your natural abilities can't get you there. But when you have supernatural courage, you're not going off of what you can do naturally. You're not going off of what your natural abilities can and where your natural abilities can get you. You're going off of the mere fact that God isn't by your side and that you have God, and that's all you need. It really reminds me of the story of Ruth. And it comes to mind because when Ruth had left the land of Moab and she went with Naomi, she said, your God is going to be your God. Wherever you go, I will go. The decision that she made in that moment, it was based off of God and God alone. And she said, your God is going to be my God. She did not know what was on the other side of that decision. She did not know. So when you have supernatural courage and confidence and faith in God, all you know is that, hey, I have God. God is wanting me to make this decision, and I have God on my side, and that's all that I need. You don't know what's going to happen on the other side of that decision. All you're standing on is the courage and confidence in who God is and what it is that he's called you to do and wanted you to do. So I want to tell you again what it means to be called first, or to be called to do something first. It means that you're called to break generational curses. It means you're called to live a set apart life. And many people like to skip over this part, but that's really important. And it means that you're called to influence other people, because a lot of times they won't even believe that it could be done in their life unless they see it happen through you. I know that I've seen that happen many times in my own life, where there are things that, I step forward and do, and there are people who won't even make a dent in the assignment that the Lord has placed on their life, because they don't believe that it could be done. They don't believe that the Lord is going to be there with them throughout it all. But if they see you doing it, then they know that the Lord is not going to leave them, because he has not left you. If he can do it for them, he can do it for you. And that's the attitude you have to have about it, because when the Lord calls you first to do something, he's not just thinking about you. A lot of times people will think that God is just thinking about them, or he's looked at them and he said, you're very special, and so I'm going to call you to do something first. And yes, that is true. You are unique and you are special to the Lord. But he's not just thinking about you. He's thinking about people who are attached to you, because he loves them too, just as much as he loves you. So I really want you to take that in mind as you're pondering on these things the Lord has called you to do, where you don't see anyone else around you who is doing something even remotely similar. Do not, can't talk today. Do not take it lightly, because it's not a light thing. It's really not. Do not take it for granted either. I know that it's something that will require a lot of strength. I know that it's something that it's very weighty too. It's something that requires not only a lot of strength and it's very weighty, but it requires that you stay in constant step and submission to God, because when you don't have anyone else whose life looks remotely close to yours, it's really easy to feel like you're walking in the dark. But you have to understand that the Lord is a light unto our feet, and he's a light into our path. And once you really understand that, you'll go deep into him and go deep into his word and realize that he's never left you, and he's never forgotten you, he's never forsaken you, and he's always there. So I really want to leave you with that. I know that, and I trust that the Lord will send everyone to this message who needs to hear it. And I ask that you even take it a step further and you share it, because I know that outside of you, there's someone as well who needs to hear this, because it's going to speak to them. If it's not for them right now, it'll be for them in the future. It'll be for them in their next season. So I love you all, and there's many wonderful resources for you below. Some of you know about the Promised Land Mentorship, but not everyone knows about it. It's a 12-month mentorship. It's a beautiful journey that really just helps you go through the different seasons of life that the Lord takes each of us through in our walk as a Christian. And it's a beautiful journey that those who have completed it have sent in wonderful testimonies about what it was like to go through, and it's just beautiful to see the completion of it and what it's done for those who went through. I've said it also so that most people can join. So if the Lord has placed in your heart to seek godly mentorship, there is a link below for you to check it out in the description. There's also a wonderful course, Journey Through the Wilderness, for those of you who are in a wilderness season. And that course, I tell you, it is downloads straight from God. It's wilderness gold. And so if you're in a wilderness season, I encourage you to join that course. If you have questions about it, please email me, because there are some things that I left off on the page there. So please email me if you have questions about that. And there's many other options for you below. If you want to sow into the ministry, because I'm a firm believer of sowing and reaping, that option is below as well. And I ask that you subscribe and hit the notification bell. That is for you, so that you're not missing out on these messages as I continue to upload them. I love you all, and I'll talk with you in the next message.